My phone buzzed at 3:47 p.m. A name I hadn't seen in 8 months flashed on the screen. Richard, my father. The text was a demand. Family dinner, 7 p.m. The vault. Don't be late. At that exact second, a news alert slid into view right below it. Fresh root valuation hits $185 million. The timing wasn't a coincidence. He didn't miss me. He saw the number. I used to beg for their attention, but staring at that screen, the old desperation didn't rise. Instead, my mind went quiet and cold like a server room. Be honest, have you ever had someone who ignored you when you were struggling but suddenly appeared the moment you started winning? Drop a yes in the comments if you know exactly how that feels. I stood in the center of my walk-in closet. It was climate-controlled, silent, and lined with rows of Italian wool and silk. 10 years ago, a text like that from my father would have sent me into a spiral. I would have torn through my wardrobe trying to find the perfect outfit, something successful enough to earn a nod from him, but humble enough not to threaten my brother's fragile ego. I would have been desperate to package myself into something they might want to buy. But today the panic was gone. In its place was a quiet, humming precision. I wasn't getting dressed for a family reunion. I was getting dressed for an undercover operation. I walked past the tailored blazers and the designer heels. I reached up to the top shelf and pulled down a dusty plastic bin. Inside were the relics of the girl they thought they knew. A faded denim jacket with a fraying collar. Scuffed white sneakers that had seen better days. A gray sweater that hung a little too loose on my frame. Putting them on felt strange, like sliding backward in time. It felt like wearing a cold, heavy skin. You might think this was just a trick, a way to trap them in a lie. But as I looked in the full-length mirror, watching the successful CEO disappear and the struggling invisible daughter re-emerge, I realized it was something deeper. It was the final test. This is the invisible chain of the survivor. It's that tiny, illogical voice in the back of your head that whispers, maybe if I strip away the success, maybe if I come to them with nothing, they will finally love me for who I am. I knew the probability was 0. I knew exactly what was going to happen. But I had to run the simulation one last time. I had to give them the opportunity to reject me when I looked poor, so that when I revealed I was rich, I wouldn't feel a shred of guilt for what came next. I needed their rejection to be absolute. I needed to know that they didn't want me, they only wanted the valuation number they saw in Forbes. I tied my hair back in a messy bun and checked my reflection again. I looked tired. I looked defeated. I looked perfect. I picked up my phone and dialed my chief financial officer. She answered on the first ring. "It's Jasmine," I said. My voice was steady, void of any familial warmth. "Execute the purchase." There was a pause on the line. She asked if I was absolutely certain I wanted to proceed with the acquisition of a mid-level wholesale food distributor. It wasn't exactly in our tech-focused portfolio. The distributor holds $3.2 million in outstanding vendor debt from Sterling Markets. I recited, staring at my own eyes in the mirror. That debt is the leverage. I want to own it by dessert. Send the confirmation to my secure line. Understood, she said. We're closing now. I hung up and slipped the phone into the pocket of my cheap denim jacket. I wasn't going to the vault to save my family. I wasn't going to beg for a seat at the table. I was going to inspect a distressed asset before final liquidation, and I was going to do it wearing the uniform of the daughter they never cared about. I ordered an Uber X. Not a black car, not an SUV. Just a regular, slightly beaten-up sedan that smelled faintly of pine air freshener and someone else's fast food. I sat in the back seat watching the city blur past the window and let my mind drift back. Back to the crumbs. That's what they gave me. Crumbs. Just enough to keep me from starving, but never enough to make me full. It's a concept in psychology called intermittent reinforcement. It's how you train a rat to keep pressing a lever even when no food comes out. If you give the rat a pellet every single time, he gets bored. If you never give him a pellet, he gives up. But if you give him a pellet randomly once every 10 times, once every 50 times, he will press that lever until he dies of exhaustion. My family mastered this. They weren't cruel 100% of the time. That would have been easy. I could have walked away from cruelty. No, they were cruel 90% of the time. The other 10%, that was the trap. I remembered being 16 working unpaid shifts at Sterling Markets after school stocking shelves while my friends were at the movies. My father would walk by, clap a heavy hand on my shoulder and say, "Good girl, Jasmine. You're learning the value of hard work." Just that one sentence. That one tiny pellet of approval. and I would ride the high of it for weeks, convincing myself that I was finally earning my place. I remembered 3 years ago when the tax liens hit for the first time. They were frantic. The business accounts were frozen. I drained my savings $45,000. I had set aside for a down payment on a condo and wired it to them. My mother hugged me. She actually hugged me. She cried and said, "You saved us. We're a team." I lived on that hug for 6 months. I replayed it in my mind whenever they forgot to call, whenever they excluded me from vacations. We're a team, I'd tell myself. They love me. They just show it differently. But then Christmas came. I showed up at the house with gifts for everyone. Hunter was there with his new girlfriend. My parents were fawning over her, refilling her wine, asking about her family. I sat on the sofa for 3 hours and not a single person asked me a question. Not one. I was the person who had saved the business, and I was less interesting to them than a stranger. That was the moment the lever broke. I realized I wasn't a team member. I was a utility. Like the electricity or the water essential, but completely unnoticed until it stops working. The Uber pulled up to the curb in front of the vault. It was an imposing building, all dark stone and heavy iron doors. The kind of place designed to make you feel important just by being inside. I thanked the driver and stepped out onto the sidewalk. I checked my reflection in the darkened window of the restaurant. The denim jacket looked cheap against the polished glass. Good. I took a breath, not to calm my nerves, but to steel them. I wasn't walking in there to beg for a pellet. I was walking in to dismantle the entire experiment. I pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside. The private dining room at the vault smelled of aged leather, truffle oil, and unearned confidence. I stepped inside, letting the heavy door click shut behind me. The scene before me was a tableau of excess. My father Richard sat at the head of the table, a napkin tucked into his collar like a caricature of a robber baron. My mother Susan was swirling a glass of deep red wine, a vintage that I recognized from the wine list in the lobby as costing $850 a bottle. My brother Hunter was already halfway through a Wagyu steak that looked like it cost more than my first car. They looked up as I entered. For a second, the silence was absolute. My mother's eyes raked over my faded denim jacket and scuffed sneakers. She didn't look happy to see her daughter. She looked embarrassed to be seen with her. "Oh, Jasmine," she sighed, setting down her wine glass. "Is that what you're wearing? We told you this was a celebration." My car broke down, I lied smoothly, pulling out the empty chair at the foot of the table. I had to take an Uber. Hunter snorted, slicing into his steak. "Uber X looks like. You couldn't spring for a black car with that Forbes money." "Enough," my father commanded. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask about the car. He gestured to the empty setting in front of me. "Sit down. We're already ordering dessert. We have business to discuss." I sat. My hands remained folded in my lap, refusing to engage with the tactical politeness of the napkin or the water glass. I just calibrated the room. "We saw the article," Richard said, getting straight to the point. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the white tablecloth. 185 million. That's a serious number, Jasmine. It's good to see you finally applying the work ethic we instilled in you. We instilled. The audacity was almost impressive. "We have an opportunity," he continued, his voice shifting into a practiced salesman cadence. "Sterling Markets is evolving. We're launching Sterling Select. It's a gourmet, hyper-local delivery service. We're going to disrupt the market, compete directly with Amazon Fresh, but for the elite demographic." He slid a glossy folder across the table. It slid over the linen and stopped just short of my hand. "We have the infrastructure," Hunter added, talking around a mouthful of beef. "We have the brand recognition. All we need is the fuel to light the rocket." "How much?" I asked. My voice was flat. "Seed capital," Richard said, waving a hand dismissively as if the number were trivial. 3.2 million. We'll structure it as a convertible note. You get equity, we get the liquidity to upgrade the fleet and launch the app before the holiday rush. $3.2 million. They weren't asking for a loan to fix a roof. They were asking for a fortune to fund a fantasy. I didn't open the folder. I looked at Hunter. "Who is developing the logistics software for this delivery fleet?" Hunter rolled his eyes. "We have a vendor. It's handled." "Which vendor?" I pressed. "What's their track record on last-mile perishables? What's your customer acquisition cost projected to be in the first quarter?" Hunter slammed his fork down. The clatter echoed in the quiet room. "God, you're annoying," he snapped. "You always were. You think because you got lucky with some tech app that you're suddenly Warren Buffett, you're wearing dirty sneakers to a 5-star steakhouse, Jasmine. You should be grateful we're even letting you in on the ground floor. This is a favor to you." My mother nodded in agreement, sipping her $800 wine. Hunter is right, dear. Don't be difficult. This is family business. We're trying to include you. I analyzed them like a failed quarterly report. They were feasting on the most expensive food in the city, running up a tab they fully expected me to pay, pitching me a delusion wrapped in insults. They showed no remorse for the 8 months of silence. They felt entitled to my money simply because they shared my DNA. The last tiny illogical hope in my chest flickered and died. It was replaced by something cold and hard as steel. You're right, I said softly. Business is about details. I reached into my bag. I didn't pull out a checkbook. I pulled out a tablet. You mentioned details, Richard said, his tone wary. What kind of details? The kind that matter, I said. Like supply chains, and vendor relationships, and solvency. I tapped the screen, bringing up a spreadsheet. Sterling Select isn't an expansion, Dad. It's a cover story. You don't need seed capital to launch an app. You need cash to pay off the $3.8 million you owe to your primary wholesale distributor. The air in the room went still. Richard froze his wine glass halfway to his mouth. Hunter stopped chewing. Even my mother seemed to sense the shift in atmospheric pressure. That's internal data, Richard said, his voice dropping. Where did you get that? It's not internal if you know where to look, I said. Or who to ask. I swiped to the next slide. It was a list of invoices. Cisco blocked your credit line 4 months ago. U.S. Foods cut you off last week. Your shelves are going to be empty by Thanksgiving unless you pay them. It's a temporary cash flow issue, Hunter interjected, though his voice lacked its usual arrogance. We're renegotiating terms. No, you're not, I said, because you're not negotiating with them anymore. I looked at my father. You're negotiating with me. Richard frowned. What are you talking about? Fresh Route acquired your primary distributor this morning, I said. The deal closed at 4 p.m. I now own the debt. I own the contract. And most importantly, I own the trucks that are scheduled to deliver your holiday inventory tomorrow morning. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. My mother looked between us confused. What does that mean, Richard? It means, I said, answering for him, that I am your supply chain. I control whether your stores stay open or close. If I tell those trucks to turn around, Sterling Markets is bankrupt in 24 hours. Hunter laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. You're bluffing. You can't just buy a distributor like that. It takes months. It takes months if you need financing, I corrected him. It takes hours if you pay cash. I watched the realization dawn on them. They were looking at the denim jacket, the scuffed sneakers, the messy hair, and suddenly they weren't seeing a failure. They were seeing a predator. Why? Richard whispered. He looked pale. Why would you do this? Because you taught me business, I said. You always said control the supply, control the market. I'm just applying your lessons. We're family, Susan said, her voice trembling. Jasmine, you wouldn't hurt your own family. I'm not hurting you, I said. I'm securing an asset, just like you tried to secure my $3.2 million over dinner. It's just business, Mom. Isn't that what you always told me when you missed my birthdays for work events? It's just business. Richard slammed his hand on the table. You ungrateful little after everything we gave you. We put a roof over your head. We fed you. And I appreciated that I said calmly. But food and shelter are the legal requirements for raising a child, Dad. They aren't a loan I have to pay back with interest. I leaned forward. Now, about those trucks. They're currently parked at the depot. If you want them to move, we need to discuss the terms of my new ownership stake in Sterling Markets. Richard stared at me. The vein in his forehead was throbbing. You want equity? I want control, I said. 51%. Controlling interest. Or the trucks stay parked. Hunter jumped up. You can't do that. This is my company. Dad promised it to me. Sit down, Hunter, I said, not even looking at him. The adults are talking. Richard looked at his son, then back at me. He saw the resolve in my eyes. He saw the cold, hard math. He knew I wasn't bluffing. Fine, he gritted out. We can discuss a partnership. But 51% is impossible. We can do 20. It's not a negotiation, I said. It's a foreclosure prevention strategy. But before you answer, you should see the rest of the file. I swiped the tablet again. Because the vendor debt isn't the only problem I found. Partnership, I repeated the word tasting, the absurdity of it. You think you're in a position to offer a partnership, Dad, you're not listening. I didn't come here to make a deal. I came here to prevent an indictment. Richard blinked, the color draining from his face faster than the wine he had been drinking. Indictment. Don't be dramatic, Jasmine. We're talking about cash flow. We were talking about cash flow 5 minutes ago, I corrected him. Now we're talking about felony embezzlement. I slid the final document across the table. It wasn't a spreadsheet of vendor invoices. It was a forensic audit of the internal accounts, specifically the accounts that were supposed to be untouchable. I had my team run a deep dive into the operational expenses, I said, my voice low and steady. We found a series of interesting withdrawals starting 18 months ago. Small at first, 5,000 here, 10,000 there, labeled as consulting fees or maintenance overages, but then they got bigger, 50,000, 100,000. I pointed to a highlighted row near the bottom of the page. $412,000 removed from the Sterling Markets Employee Pension Fund on August 14th. The silence in the room wasn't just heavy, it was dead. Richard looked like he had stopped breathing. Hunter had gone the color of ash. That money is protected by federal law, Dad, I said. It belongs to the cashiers who have stood on their feet for 30 years. It belongs to the butchers and the stock boys. And you took it. It was a loan, Richard croaked, his voice barely a whisper. We were going to put it back. As soon as the Sterling Select app launched. You took it to cover Hunter's debts, I interrupted. I looked at my brother, who was now staring fixedly at his congealed steak. The data on the screen was the only truth in the room. I traced the wire transfers, Hunter. They didn't go to app developers. They went to a shell company in Nevis that links directly to an online sports book. You gambled away the retirement savings of 200 employees. Susan let out a small, strangled sound. She looked from Richard to Hunter, her eyes wide with a horror that had nothing to do with social standing and everything to do with reality crashing down. You stole from them, she whispered. Richard, tell me you didn't steal from the pension fund. I had to, Richard snapped, though he didn't look at her. Hunter was in trouble. These people, they aren't the kind you owe money to. I was protecting the family. You weren't protecting the family, I said. You were protecting a criminal, and in doing so you became one. I leaned back in my chair, watching the arrogance evaporate from their bodies. The posturing, the buzzwords, the condescension about my clothes, it was all gone. All that was left were 3 terrified people sitting in the wreckage of their own choices. This isn't just bad business, Dad. This is 20 years in federal prison. It's RICO charges. It's the kind of scandal that doesn't just bankrupt you, it erases you. I tapped the table with my index finger. The only reason the FBI isn't knocking on your door right now is that I own the debt and I haven't filed the audit report yet. I am the only thing standing between you and a cell. Susan stared at me, her eyes filling with tears. But they weren't tears of remorse for the stolen pensions or the ruined lives. They were tears of terror for her own comfort. The realization that her country club membership, her social standing, and her perfect life were about to be incinerated by a federal indictment broke her. Jasmine, please, she sobbed, reaching across the table as if to grab my hand, though she stopped short when she saw the look in my eyes. You can't do this. We gave you life. We raised you. We put food on this table and clothes on your back. Doesn't that mean anything? You owe us. I stood up slowly. I didn't scream. I didn't let my voice shake. I looked down at her with a clarity that felt almost surgical. You're talking about biological investment, Mom, I said. You provided food and shelter. That is the legal baseline for keeping a child alive. That is the bare minimum required to not be arrested for neglect. But you are confusing that with emotional equity. I walked around the table, my sneakers silent on the plush carpet. Equity is earned through investment, I continued. Emotional equity is earned by showing up to science fairs. It is earned by remembering birthdays. It is earned by asking, "How are you?" and actually waiting for the answer. You invested 0 emotional equity in me, Mom. You treated me like a bad stock you wanted to dump. And now that I'm profitable, you think you're entitled to a dividend. I stopped behind my father's chair. That's not how the market works. You have 0 vested interest in my future because you sold your shares in my life years ago. Richard had his head in his hands. Hunter was shaking, looking at the door as if he could run away from the FBI. I am not here to send you to prison, I said, my voice dropping to a businesslike register. Not because I owe you, but because I refuse to let the name Sterling Markets be destroyed by your incompetence. Those employees deserve their pensions, and I am going to save them. I pulled the final document from my bag. It wasn't an audit. It was a contract. This is a severance agreement, I said, sliding it in front of Richard. Here are the terms. Richard, you retire immediately for health reasons. Hunter, you are terminated for cause effective tonight. You will sign over 51% controlling interest of Sterling Markets to Fresh Root. In exchange, I will personally recapitalize the pension fund and assume the vendor debt. Fired Hunter squeaked. But what will I do? I suggest you learn a trade, I said coldly. Gambling isn't working out for you. I handed Richard a pen. It was a cheap plastic bic from my pocket, a stark contrast to the heavy fountain pen he usually used to sign checks he couldn't cash. You have two choices, I told him. Option A. You sign this, you walk away with your freedom and a very modest monthly stipend that I control. Option B. I walk out that door, I unpause the trucks, and I email this forensic audit to the Department of Justice. Richard looked at the pen. He looked at his weeping wife and his ruined son. He looked at the daughter he had ignored for 29 years, the daughter who was now the only thing holding up the sky. He realized then that he wasn't the patriarch anymore. He was just a liability I was managing. With a shaking hand, he took the pen. He didn't read the fine print. He knew he had no leverage. He signed his name, surrendering his empire to the invisible girl in the denim jacket. Smart choice, I said, taking the paper back before the ink was even dry. I stood up, leaving the signed severance papers and the unpaid dinner bill on the table. The Wagyu steaks had gone cold. The vintage wine was barely touched. It was a tableau of waste, perfectly fitting for the family I was leaving behind. Goodbye, Dad, I said. Goodbye, Mom. I didn't say goodbye to Hunter. He was busy staring at the tablecloth, trying to figure out how to live without a trust fund to gamble. I walked out of the private dining room, the heavy door sealing them in with their consequences. I walked through the main restaurant, past the tables of happy diners, past the bar where business deals were being toasted. Nobody looked at me. Nobody saw the invisible girl in the denim jacket. But I felt different. The air in the lobby felt lighter. The knot in my chest that had been there for 29 years, the knot of waiting, of hoping, of needing, was gone. I stepped out onto the sidewalk. The night air was cool and crisp. My Uber was already waiting at the curb. I got in the back seat. Where to? The driver asked. Home, I said. And can we stop for ice cream? I'm celebrating. As we pulled away from the curb, I took out my phone. I opened my contacts. I found Dad. Block. I found Mom. Block. I found Hunter. Block. One by one, I erased them from my digital life. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of hygiene. I was removing the infection so the wound could finally heal. I looked out the window at the city lights. I thought about the little girl who used to wait by the window for parents who never came home on time. I thought about the teenager who worked for free to earn a nod. I thought about the woman who had built a $185 million company just to prove she was worth something. She was worth something. She always had been. She just had to stop looking for her value in a mirror that was broken. The silence in the car wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. It was the sound of a debt paid in full. I didn't lose a family tonight. I lost a liability. And for the first time in my life, my ledger was finally balanced. Sometimes the most expensive thing you can buy is your own freedom, and it is worth every penny. If you've ever had to buy your own peace, share this story. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding your voice.